How do we start creating alternative narratives? And part of how we're doing that is we have this amazing group of young creatives that we are calling our Africa Retold Fellows. And we are going to be getting about 10 of those every year for the next 5 years. And these are people that have a singular goal, and that goal is to use their talent and their skills to tell amazing stories about the continent. We have 11 already this year. We had so many people we couldn't get it down to 10, so we have 11 this year, and we are lucky that we are joined by a few of them at this panel, and we'll showcase their work over the next 2 days. And then tomorrow we're going to have an Africa hashtag No Filter panel where we'll do a more in-depth discussion on this work. We are also looking at engaging African partnerships because the foundation is a global organization. We believe that the African narrative work needs to have an African face. So we have created some amazing partnerships. Kwese platform is one of our partners, and Mr. Strive was here this morning. We are very excited about the opportunity to use that platform to be able to push these positive narratives. We're also working with the Nigerian foundation, Aspire Corona Trust Foundation, which is part of Access Bank, and they're very committed also to working with us on this. So we are looking for more media partnership. We're looking for philanthropists that can come on board to help us be able to push this initiative. So what we have done now is to do a brief video that basically says this is why we are doing this and what we're trying to accomplish. So I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you over the next 2 days as we look at some of the samples of work by our amazing group of Africa hashtag No Filter Fellows. Thank you very much.
To the rest of the world, Africa is a dark continent, full of disease, war, drought, famine, and corruption, unhealthy, dishonest, and lacking vision. A clueless people, unable to manage itself, its resources, and opportunities. This is the Africa that the world has created. But this is not the real Africa. Africa is home to more than 1 billion people in 54 countries with more than 2,000 indigenous languages. Africa is home to the youngest demographic in the world, the highest rate of urbanization in the world, new buildings, and amazing infrastructure, shopping malls and international brands setting up shop all over Africa to tap into the tremendous opportunities that abound all across the continent. Africans are early adopters of technology, and the continent is home to some of the most innovative technology startups in the world today. Africa has some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And there are many Africans on the Forbes list of billionaires, and more African women running multi-billion industries, playing significant roles in global leadership, and more female children enrolled at various levels of education than ever before. With 60% of the world's arable land, Africa is the nexus of agricultural technology and possibly will be able to feed the world in the next 2 decades. And yes, like every other part of the world, Africa has its challenges. Challenges like insecurity, poor leadership, increasing inequality between the haves and the have-nots, an economic growth rate that has slowed down because of global challenges. But these challenges should not and do not define Africa and who we are. And that is a continent with different stories, different people, different challenges, and different narratives. The story of Africa and of Africans, our successes and our challenges, should be told to the world without filters. Africa, hashtag no filter.
Thank you, Paul. A great initiative. I'd now like to, as you may have noticed from the somewhat stumbling transition there, it was announced that the president had arrived just as we were in the middle of our conversation. So I'd like to invite Strive back up for just a few minutes to talk a little bit with me, but really with this whole group, because we've heard from some of you that obviously having Strive here is a great opportunity to chat again. So before we get back to Google and Facebook, because I wanted to really talk about that, what do you think of that, Africa No Filters?
Well, Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, is a very good friend of mine. So he had me over at his offices, and so I agreed to be a partner in this initiative. And it's very important, and we are obviously going to be broadcasting a lot of these messages to try and shift the narrative. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we were talking about Google and Facebook, and I know, so you said, just to repeat the conversation, I made the statement that actually in the U.S. and Europe, and I'd say parts of Asia, Google and Facebook have a stranglehold on the media industry. Famously, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, and whether it's Eric Schmidt or Larry Page, the founder CEOs of Google, they famously will never, ever call themselves media companies. Yet, by anyone's measure, they are the two biggest media companies on the planet. And they have a very contentious relationship with the rest of the media world because they are like a vacuum cleaner sucking up all the revenue, particularly on the advertising side. Google has $80 billion of ad revenue going to Google. Facebook has $28 billion. These are 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old companies, and they're growing at 25% on a $90 or $80 billion base, and leaving the rest of the media industry literally sort of looking for the crumbs or the scraps that fall off the big person's table. So, is that happening here in Africa? How dangerous are these tech platforms to the future of African media?
Well, you sound like the telecoms industry talking about them 5 years ago. That's what we were going through. Because you've got to bear in mind that Facebook and Google use our infrastructure. We have to build the networks for someone to see something. And they don't share that revenue. And if we don't have the revenue, they have the consumer on their side who demands that we deliver faster, cheaper networks, and our incomes were coming down as well. So it's, but innovation in the end is the only way that we all change things. This is not new. People were saying this about big mobile. They were saying this
AOL and
Yahoo 10 years ago. So innovation comes and people begin to break this up. Everybody you talk about Google, but don't forget Amazon. On the other side. Netflix and so forth. So it's all going to be about how quickly we can be innovators, and also how quickly we can be fast followers. It's not always about you being the innovator out there, but as the Chinese have shown us, you can be a fast follower.
Yeah.
Okay? So they respond with Alibaba, with Tencent, with their own platforms, the Beidus and so forth. And we in Africa will have to do the same. We have to respond with innovative solutions. And sometimes we have to work with them, to the extent that we can. We are working with Facebook now to do some really innovative stuff. So back in August, we did our first major experiment with broadcasting a full live sports tournament. when we broadcast the NBA Africa game.
On Facebook Live.
Facebook Live. It was carried by Facebook Live.
What kind of audience did you see?
Oh, for that particular game, it wasn't that big. Probably maybe about 1 million or 2. But now we've almost perfected it. So we've been working together now. We just broadcast a boxing match between, who knows the boxer, Anthony Joshua was born in Nigeria, and he fought an African, French African from Cameroon. It was massive. And even my Facebook live events like this, which we will later again take into content onto our entrepreneurial channels, we do 6-7 million people will log in for this stuff. So we are beginning to see them as platforms on which to get our content out.
But the issue, and the same has been true, obviously, in the States with Facebook, especially in Google, and as you say, emerging platforms like Amazon. And for the last maybe 5-7 years, the audiences have been huge. And there's been so much excitement about, oh my God, I can build a digital media property that can go from 0 to 25 million users in a year or 2 years, by either gaming Google's search algorithm or gaming Facebook's algorithm. But at the end of the day, no revenue.
No revenue.
No revenue.
That's the issue.
And so, and the platforms are refusing to really engage with the content owners on a more equitable revenue division. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, look, I don't want to go into too much, but there's been all sorts of issues between our industry and them, including, filtering out adverts to force them to come to the table and talk to us, without going into too. But we do talk to them. We spent the whole of last week with Facebook to try and see how we can get the maths to work for both sides. But you've got to also, the thing is they've got a lot of leverage.
They have a lot of leverage.
And a lot of money.
Yes.
So it's a challenge.
We say at Bloomberg, we have very few exciting business relationships with Google or Facebook, because even Bloomberg, which is one of the biggest media companies in the world, we don't have leverage. So we have a wonderful relationship with Twitter.
Yeah,
because they're smaller and don't have have been much fairer in the way that they've approached an arrangement.
Yeah, and people like Snapchat, and of course, I'm very keen on that Twitter thing that you guys have been working on. I'm watching them very closely with this Twitter Bloomberg thing.
Yes, we're launching. Bloomberg is launching a new global 24-hour news smartphone delivered news channel in partnership with Twitter, which is going to be launching on December 18th, focusing primarily on the U.S. market at the outset, but will be coming all around the world, and hopefully Africa too with Strive. So
with all the Africans here, I'm on his case. I've been saying I want this for Africa. No, you don't go via Japan and China, and then this is how things get here. They say, okay, we've launched it in the U.S. Now we've got to try it in the U.K. and Germany and Japan, China. Okay, we do Africa. So I've said, okay, but the route is this way now. Do you agree? Yeah. So Bloomberg verified with Twitter, we're ready.
Yes, and I can assure you that we have not hosted a media conference of this nature actually in Asia or other parts of the world. We've actually focused on Africa. And many of us not only have business hopes and aspirations, but have personal histories in Africa that make this a very special experience. So we have just a time for just a few questions. So let me put it out to the floor and see if anyone has any questions for Strive. By the way, I wanted to say, Strive's one of the unusual people who has achieved the status of only having one name and being recognized. It's like Oprah and Bono.
No, and Beyonce.
And Beyonce. So the questions for Strive. Okay. Yes, go ahead. Oh, we'll get you a microphone, I guess. Over here.
Thanks so much. My name's Turi Muntir, and I'm a partner at a VC which only invests in media and media technology. One of the things which has interested us has been local languages across India, UK. I mean, English language media has broadly plateaued, but we've seen a huge explosion in news and other forms of media in local languages. How does that look from where you're standing here in Africa?
It's a very challenging opportunity, and because on the one hand, obviously the more authentic and the more local we can get, the better our product. But you also have to bear in mind that if I suddenly say, okay, we're going to do Yoruba in Nigeria, then the Hausa say, okay, what about us? The Fulani say, what about us? So I have to be prepared to do all of them, and there could be 800 languages. So we're experimenting, for instance, at the moment, we are launching a new channel called Kwese Swahili, which will be our first non-English language, but Swahili is spoken across a number of East African countries and doesn't create us a challenge there. Because we are trying to unify Africa as much as we can. And it is a challenge, but we are looking at ways to commission while allowing the smallest of languages to also feel they're included. Because it can be a very quick way to make people feel not included. So it's a challenge.
Great. Any more questions over here? Start here and then over here. Or do you want to start here, the microphone there? Okay.
I can? Okay. Well, my name is Tijansi. When I hear Mr. Masiwa speak, it's like he sorted out the issue with the big ones, Facebook and Google. While probably for him it is sorted out. But for the vast majority of the African media, that is not the case. No, I don't think there's any media house in the continent. I may be wrong. If someone here can correct me, they can. That is profiting seriously from Google or Facebook. And I think there's the World Association of Newspapers that has conducted a study that proves that Facebook is not really giving back to the media worldwide. It's not an African issue, it's a global issue. It's not giving back worldwide to the media what they deserve by providing content. Thank you.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. It takes something like WhatsApp. It takes a lot of data to deliver you a WhatsApp. But you can actually get and make a phone call on WhatsApp after I have built a network, and I get zero. I get nothing for your call. And if I say I'm not going to build a network, you can go to another operator and do the same. So we started having these complaints about these guys not sharing long before the media industry. And we lost because the consumer was on their side. Okay, and it's a challenge because even on the media industry, they can go to a Coca-Cola or some big advertiser and say, listen, I've got 2 billion consumers, and they are paid over there. You on this side get nothing. So it's a complex challenge, and now I could stand on the mountain and go to Congress and say, it's time you broke up this monopoly, and others. Maybe others will Who knows? Maybe because that has happened in times past. But I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a policy guy. So I have to live in I don't fight the conditions. I rise up in the morning like a soldier. If it's raining, I must fight. If it's sunshine, I must fight. If it's snowing, I must fight. That's the life of an entrepreneur. Okay? So that's why I say I'll engage them, try and get what I can out of them, and so should you. But meanwhile, I'm waiting for the next innovator to beat their backside, So maybe it's you. But it's not there's no easy answers.
But what did you do in your telecom business to respond to some of their pressures? When you fought back against some of those dynamics from Facebook and Google or other semi-monopolistic, how did you fight back?
We built new businesses. For instance, we gave up on voice. Voice used to be our business, and telecoms businesses tanked because of platforms delivered by these guys, and that's why we began to push into media. We've even invested in little companies that do things like them, because remember, there are things happening in the background. And that's why we're venture capitalist friends. I was talking to him a little earlier. There are little African companies playing around in these spaces that we're putting some money behind too. So there's no panacea. There's no easy solution to that kind of monopoly power. And it's going to require a whole range of tools. We've seen what happened with the American elections, the danger that can lie behind that kind of power. Okay? So we hope that the people on this side of the divide, whether you're an activist, whatever, you begin to see that we've got to find solutions to these things. But as entrepreneurs, we have to survive in the conditions and play the game that we find.
Take one last question.
I'm happy to cede the question space because I asked one earlier.
Oh, okay. That's generous of you.
Hello, my name is Aaron Akinosho from Benin, and I have one question. You've previously said that the device on which we consume information are changing, and this change implies a change of the way we produce information. So, how you at Kwesi, do you adapt to the new formats that need to be produced for this kind of device? Thank you.
I don't know whether I should answer that question, because then I give away competitive. Naspers, are you listening? But you're right. It reminds me of when we started the mobile industry. And people had only a perspective of a fixed phone. So, it was quite funny. People would say, okay, so what do we do when people are walking around? They won't want to hear other people talking. So we say, okay, we gave them voicemail. And then we used the SMS to alert them about the voicemail. They gave up on the voicemail. They started using the SMS. What is going to happen fundamentally is even the format. Who says, you see, the 30-minute format, the 1-hour format, these things will disappear. Okay? You, the content guys, you're going to have to learn to tell your story in 10 minutes, in 5 minutes. Okay? Because of the new screen. Okay? Coming from where we are today, because we are still fixated of the TV in front of us, and we think a story is told in 30 minutes. Why? It will be told in 5 and 10 minutes. Completely new formats must emerge. And we are in a race that gives us a competitive advantage now. Because the The landscape is being redesigned. And so this is an opportunity for African filmmakers. Okay, forget the formats. I was laughing the other day with somebody who said that the challenge in the US was everything costs $2 million to make. How do you make a $2 million? They want to bring the cost down. I said, no, in Africa, in Nigeria, we can make the movie for $10,000. Our problem is we can't reduce it from 10 hours to 10 minutes. You know, those Nollywood movies, they go on forever, you know. So I said, we've got to sit down and maybe you show us your side and we show you our side. So we can get the cost down. And so begin to think of it in a different way. Maybe this is our chance now. Now that everything is in 10 minutes, or 5-minute, or 2-minute formats, can we tell a whole story? Why not? And so if that whole thing is disrupted and changed, this is new media now. And again, it's like, how do we get video content out Twitter style? It's not only Trump who can do it, you know. He's running a whole country on Twitter. So, you know, they said they've increased the characters to 280 letters. I said, you know, this is a problem for Trump now. But anyway, I'm sure the President of the United States has a good sense of humor. So we've got to not so much as see these things as threats, but there's also little opportunities out there. Maybe it's time we build things that sit on Twitter and Facebook, just like they build things that sit on us.
As long as we can get them to share the revenue.
We don't have to ask. We've got to figure out how to because they didn't ask us. So, you know, when we go to use their platforms, we will find ways to use them without having to ask, but don't break IP laws. Just let's be smart about it. We'll find ways to use these platforms.
Well, great. Well, thank you. Well, your comments remind me, I can't remember which, whether it was Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, but he had a famous line that said, and this is the Strive philosophy of creating media for smartphones, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. Thanks to Strive.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. See you later.
Okay. I think, I'm just going to get the clicker. Actually, this is going to be a very quick presentation that I have been asked to give by my boss over here, Lorena, and Matt Winkler. Again, my background, I've been in the media industry virtually my whole life, other than a short stint actually in West Africa, working for the U.S. State Department up north in Burkina Faso. But I have lived and breathed media for as long as I can remember and been through the ups and downs and the trenches that Strive talks about. And what I wanted just to do is to give what is inevitably kind of a Western U.S.-centric presentation on a sort of a tour d'horizon, if you will, of the state of media at a very, very high level in like 5 to 7 minutes, and then try to relate some of these ideas to Africa. So as Strive mentioned, the global revolution of both mobile and social, and you have to think of mobile and social as siblings. When you're experiencing mobile, you are usually involved in social, and these two trends of mobile and social are so overwhelmingly dominant, and are this huge tsunami wave that is taking over the planet. And you can see the numbers. They're unbelievable. I was at the pool yesterday up here at the Kempinski Hotel, and I turned to Kat, who's over here, my partner, and I said, look around. And there were literally 100 people, and 199 were not talking to each other, looking at their own phones. And I mean, it was scary. It felt like sort of some apocalyptic, strange portrait of depression and isolation. When everyone was supposed to come together. But so not only is it having huge transformative impact on the media industry and us media owners, media operators, content creators, but it's actually having major implications on the psychology and social communication of humans. If any of you have teenage daughters or teenage sons, you'll understand this even more profoundly. So social and mobile are the tsunami wave, and accept it or get out of the game. And what's happening as well, and this is also tied to this image at the Kempinski pool, is that the amount of time that people are consuming media is skyrocketing. Because all of a sudden, media's in their pocket. It's video, it's text, it's social, it's Twitter, and it is going up so rapidly. In fact, some of these numbers are actually are from a study that's a little bit understated. There are some studies that indicate that among certain segments of demographics, particularly teenagers, there's a consumption of media of 11 hours a day, which is more than you sleep. And so, again, the flip side, while there's psychological sort of dangerous consequences for that, the business opportunities are also incredible, because all of a sudden the market that you're serving is actually using your product and engaging in your products and services for not just twice the amount of time, but 4 times the amount of time or 6 times the amount of time. It's an opportunity, as Strive said. Think of this as a much more engaged, greater audience. But as I mentioned, and I think you could hopefully hear the sort of passion in my voice, and I share the comments from this gentleman over here. The digital advertising model globally is under withering attack. 5 years ago, I started a new business called Quartz. You may know Quartz Africa. Quartz. I was the founder of that, and because I'd been at The Economist before, and I wanted to create a mobile social disruptor of The Economist magazine, and it's done amazingly well. It's 30 to 35 million. And I designed a business model that was advertising driven, premium, social, mobile. 40 million readers around the world, 3 times The Economist, 5 times The Economist, 5 times the FT. But in that 5-year period, since we started Quartz, the Google and Facebook have taken so much of the ad revenue that actually new businesses that have great audiences and great demographics like Quartz cannot compete, because they don't have the targeting, they don't have the data, and they don't actually compete on pricing because of the scale that Google and Facebook. So this is a huge, huge issue. You have big content companies across the world who are seeing declines in digital advertising, when in fact a few years ago digital advertising was supposed to be the great hope for the future of media, with traditional print and traditional television and radio advertising declining. But one thing has happened, and this is very recent. Obviously, you may have followed what's gone on in Europe with the European Union and Brussels, with some of the regulation that's begun to happen to the platforms, particularly Facebook and Google. There's been a big effort to do so. One of the biggest fines ever levied against a company, over $2 billion recently by the EU. But in the U.S., because of this most recent investigation that's happening, on many levels of the Russian meddling in the 2016 election, you're seeing the beginnings of a significant backlash that is against Facebook. And I agree with Strive. This is not the domain of an entrepreneur to think about how to influence Washington, but what you do have in the background, even though they are eating up the media industry, you have legislators in Brussels and in Washington now who are paying attention in a very different way than before. And I wouldn't put it past all of us for some significant changes to come very soon, especially when data like comes out that 126 million Americans were exposed to fake news that was purchased by the Russian counterintelligence services, 40% of the American population. So on the flip side, Strive talked about subscription revenue and paywalls. This is a little bit of more of a news-centric perspective, and I use the New York Times as one, again, U.S.-centric and news-centric example. But you are seeing the beginnings of some sort of rays of hope in the paywall world, which for years, for the last 15 years, paywalls have been, an unmitigated disaster for text-based content. For video, paywalls have obviously have been the domain of pay TV and satellite TV, and they've transitioned quite nicely to digital platforms, and even though they're facing their own disruption from new platforms like Netflix. But you're seeing the beginnings of a change in consumer behavior where consumers are starting to say, if it's really high-quality content with a good brand that I trust, particularly in this whole social media world full of stuff that I can't trust, I actually might part with a little bit of money for this content. And so you see, for instance, one of the great examples is the New York Times, fueled by an anti-Trump editorial position, but it's built up almost a $500 or $600 million subscription revenue stream just across the last 2 years. One amazing fact that speaks to this, the Wall Street Journal, actually a competitor to Bloomberg, in the first 9 months of 2017, added $150 million of new subscription revenue to the Wall Street Journal, which is really, really remarkable. It means that's professional information for consumers, but that's a large, large market. In fact, we look around at Bloomberg. We're free, our digital properties, because we have the terminal. But if you take the FT, the Financial Times, we're talking about global business media, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Economist, between them, there's $1.5 billion of subscription revenue being spent by professional business people who are getting that content every day. This is a huge market. It's growing very, very rapidly. So there's some hope here. But the problem is it's still the exception. It's professional information, it's niche information, and the 1 in a million New York Times example of really high quality, great journalism that people want to support. So the key questions that sort of I think about a lot when I think about the future of media is this question I was pushing Strive on. When will the relationship between media and these dominant tech platforms, these monopolistic, frankly, new media companies or new tech platforms sort of pretending not to be media companies, when will that relationship equalize? Because right now it's literally an incredibly unequal relationship that is causing a lot of issues. Facebook could wake up tomorrow and say, listen, we're going to take that rev share that we have with all of our premium content companies, and we're going to move it all the way from an 80-20 or something which is far more in their favor to something which is much more equitable, or even go even further and reward quality journalism. And they could save the journalism business in America and around the world. Literally, they could save it because their coffers are so full. Same thing with Google. They haven't done it yet, but that might happen, particularly with the regulatory pressure as a result of some of these changes, some of this fake news that is now being regulated and looked at. And of course, the second question is how much will this consumer subscription trend continue to swell and grow? It obviously will continue, I think, very clearly on the entertainment side, but the question is how broadly will that subscription sort of attitudinal behavior grow and become the norm on the news side and the tech side as opposed to just video. Africa, as you heard, has tremendous natural opportunities, most importantly of which is it's really at the beginning of this huge transformation. All around the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park, there's a poster, and the poster says, it is day one. Never forget, it is day one. And this is their sort of internal corporate culture for saying it's just the beginning. This is just the beginning of the social mobile revolution. And I think the same, for Africa, you might be able to have a similar sort of level of inspiration. We're just in the beginning of this opportunity. And entrepreneurs like Strive and others, and many of you in the room, can create large businesses, purposeful businesses on the back of it, especially given the scale of the mobile adoption, and especially given the growth that's anticipated. Advertising growth rates across Africa are beyond, even though it's going to be largely sort of absorbed by Google and Facebook in the short term. It is actually a significant growth opportunity and one which one can fight for a little bit. And what I did here on this last slide is I did something which is, took a slide. I gave a presentation in America called a survival guide to living with the duopoly. And so I sort of took a lot of these ideas and expressed them here for in the African context. But, I'm going to go through these very quickly, but if you define your brand really powerfully, and your brand means something to consumers, you can fight the duopoly, because brands actually are a critical sort of human emotional connection that differentiates your content. And so you learn how to manage your brands, differentiate it. Fight, I say here, for your last breath, for that direct relationship with your audience. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to develop an audience on the platforms, but you still can develop that direct subscription relationship, that direct daily relationship. Choose your platform partnerships carefully. Don't necessarily, as I mentioned, Twitter actually is willing to actually partner with you in a much more successful way than other platforms. Your data is so essential. Video obviously is so essential. Operating locally is so essential within a global context. What I oftentimes say, particularly if you're a general interest brand or content player, you can't. That is a very dangerous place to be in a platform world. And so I say fragment yourself into niches and where you can actually find sort of more value in specific areas. Obviously, in terms of innovation, do things that platforms can't do. And of course, in all business and all entrepreneurship, it's all about, at the end of the day, the talent and the execution. So there's my 8-minute overview of media around the world. And I now would like to invite the next panel, which is a very distinguished group of entrepreneurs, financiers, executives, to come to the table, to come up here to talk about the future of African media again. Okay. Maybe move this along. All right. Well, thank you. Let me just do some introductions first. I was briefed on pronunciations about 4 hours ago, so we'll see how well my memory lasts. But we have at the very end Adama Wade from Financial Afrique, which is a Senegalese-based financial information and content brand. We'll hear more about that. Next to him is Tutu Ajare, who I think will be familiar to a lot of people, certainly in Ghana in this room. I Googled you and I found an article that said you the most important, impressive banker to know in all of Africa. So that was a pretty good start. I didn't see whether it was fake news or not. And then we have Kanye Delomo, let me just back up on Tutu. Tutu's the managing partner of Nubuke Investments. He ran UBS's investment banking business in Africa and South Africa for many years, and is a prominent investor, and will bring a great perspective from that point of view. Next, then we have Kanye Delomo, who is the CEO of Editor Media, which is a magazine, multi-platform magazine brand based, but also digital company based in South Africa. She's an entrepreneur. She owns her company, having started off working for Naspers in her first iteration. And finally here, Tori Munte, who's the venture capitalist from North Base Media, who asked the question here. North Base is one of the few VC firms that focuses explicitly on media technology opportunities in emerging markets around the world, and so has a very unique perspective. So why don't we just go down, starting with you, Adame. Just tell us about your businesses, not too voluminous, but just give us a quick overview. What is Financial Afrique, and how and how is it going?
Yeah. So good morning to everyone. Financial Africa is a finance measure launched in 2012 in Senegal, Morocco, and Mauritania. It's very complicated. I don't go there. And our aiming was to create a news in Africa, but inside and from Africa. Because as you say later, a lot of news we have in Africa is made abroad. So after a lot of years outside of Africa, then we come back in Africa to launch a major, professional measure with financial news. We start by our little economies and also a lot of money. So 5 years after, we now have all the Francophone coverage plus France and Belgium. So there is a lot of challenges. When I see the figure you show out here, I think we're just in the beginning. Financial Africa is just a little measure in the beginning. We shall give a lot of attention to the trend and to all this figure you gave today.
Great.
Yes.
Exciting. So, Tutu, give us you're currently at Nubuku Investments, which is your own investment firm that you founded in 2007. What's on your mind right? Tell us a bit about Nubuku and tell us about what's on your mind right now, professionally.
I mean, we are a Pan-African investment company that focuses on, one, direct investments in the continent, and two, from an advisory perspective, we spend a lot of time talking to governments and senior business leaders across the continent about the trends that we see, and we have a number of multinational clients who we help navigate the sometimes challenging waters as it pertains to Africa. Media is one of those areas and technology specifically is one of those areas we've been looking at very closely, because the level of disruption that is occurring right now is significantly transforming business models. But within that transformation, we see certain opportunities. And two of my 6 business partners have very strong technology backgrounds. One used to be a technology banker, the other one used to run one of the mobile phone companies here. And we have made some investments in fintech, more recently in education. But within the media space itself, trying to understand the business model of media companies going forwards is tough. I mean, I have a...
Is that fair to say that you have not made a media investment yet?
Not as yet. And interestingly, I have an even slightly different perspective because I have a son who's just graduating and going through, then he's doing political science and economics, and going through those conversations. Do you buy into a newspaper business? Well, what does the business model look like? Is it all about clicks? Where do you sit? Do you sit in the data end of the spectrum? Do you sit in the journalistic end of the spectrum? Do you sit in the delivery end of the spectrum? It's just not clear to me where one would sit. And I think part and parcel of this debate is really to gain more knowledge of what the audience thinks and what you yourselves think about where the business model lies, and within that take advantage of the opportunities.
Yep, exactly. Well, that is the conversation. I think if we can, there's nothing worse than panels with 4 people where the same question goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to avoid that at all costs. But the big question that we want to sort of animate here as a group, and so feel free to sort of speak over each other and respectfully, but it is this question of, the media business is so essential to economies, to countries, to civic societies. What are the models that can work in Africa in 2017 and beyond that will get you excited to invest in, to grow, and to build? And I think that's the key question. But so tell us about your model, Kanye.
We have a multi-platform and a multi-revenue stream model. And Dalo Media is 10 years old. I launched it in 2007, straight out of my time doing my MBA at Harvard Business School. We started off creating business, career, and entrepreneurship content, primarily for South Africa, for men and women under the Destiny brand, which over time has grown from being a magazine brand to a digital brand, an events brand. And really what inspired the idea of creating this business and lifestyle content was the lack of accessible, useful information that career and entrepreneurship people could use to make the right decisions, to connect with each other, to empower themselves. And over time, particularly our digital platforms have grown to reach about 1 million consumers a month. As a company, we're now in about 13 African countries, and we reach about 4 million consumers every month. More recently, we've acquired the license for L&L Decoration in South Africa to give us entry into the fashion and lifestyle space, and we're in the final stages of finalizing acquiring the Billboard license for South Africa, which will allow us to enter the music and entertainment space, but obviously from an African perspective. And both in the entrepreneurship and career side and also in fashion, music and entertainment, we approach these areas by really being platform agnostic. Print is still a relatively dominant platform in South Africa. Our print brands are still either maintaining audiences or showing 1 to 3% growth.
This is magazine print, as opposed to
magazine
print, right?
Because newspaper print, as in the rest of the world, is definitely declining. And magazine print as well is either stagnant or declining. So I think we've been quite fortunate to either maintain or grow. However, I still think that our runway is no more than 15 to 20 years in terms of an interest in print. And so we're growing quite aggressively in digital, in event marketing, in technology, developing apps and services, and actually turning our content into services people can use. So instead of just talking about a particular career for information purposes, which is what we've done all along, it's thinking about how can we turn this information into a service. So how does this assist someone in terms of a job search? How does it assist someone in terms of interview preparation? And a lot of these sound very basic, particularly for people in the US or Europe, but I think that's something that African entrepreneurs have to consider is what are the structural needs that the consumer has? And, as sort of payments by mobile have transformed that part of the economy, what are some of the needs that consumers have around information, around media? What are the services that we can provide that solve real problems and that we can turn into businesses?
Yeah.
So I don't think, for me, I think less about, which part of media does one enter into, but rather what is the consumer looking for, and where are the gaps, and how can what we do be transformed into something that solves that problem, but that can also be monetized.
But the bet you're making, which is, and this is how Tutu would look at you as a potential investor. He would say, okay, so they bet on a few print magazines. It's their majority platform. They're licensing more print magazines in the form of Elle and Billboard. It's growing at 1 to 3%. You think you have a 10 to 15% runway on print magazines, but then she's doing all this interesting stuff on the side to monetize the brands in different ways. The key kind of question is, will this stuff grow faster than this stuff declines? And how would you answer that?
I think it can. And certainly on our side, the digital side is certainly growing faster than the print is declining. It is helped by the fact that I think we're producing, to this day, content that many of our consumers are still willing to buy, even on print. Because really the mindset of the consumer in Africa, I believe, isn't just about wanting to be entertained, but people have real needs for information to make their lives better. So people are still looking for information that moves them from A to B, that makes them better in their careers, and they're willing to pay for that.
Are they paying that? Are they paying you subscription dollars for that?
Not digitally yet, but we're moving towards that model, but certainly from a print point of view. We also don't just focus on the consumer, but we have quite a big part of our business that is also growing faster than print is declining, which is business-to-business content, both in print and digital. So we help companies that see themselves or would like to develop media platforms for themselves to create content. So Toyota, for example, is a customer of ours. We create content for their Toyota and Lexus buyers, and we've created a magazine for them, both in print and digital. South African Airways, the national airline, is a customer of ours. Liberty, which is a South African financial services company, uses us to create digital content for their insurance policy holders. So there's an opportunity as well to use those skills that we've developed in content creation to create platforms for other companies as well. So it's not just consumer dependent. But the subscription economy is one we're watching, and there's opportunity there as well. If one just tracks what are the areas that people really value, and in South Africa, and I know in most parts of Africa, it's around personal development, personal betterment, and so content and services that meet that need are excellent candidates for a subscription-based model, and that's certainly something we're looking at.
Great. Tori, you have a fantastic perspective, because you're like Tutu, you're sort of sitting there more as an investor looking at business opportunities, good ROI. You're looking at emerging markets beyond just the African continent. You're looking at the Middle East. You're looking at, I think your partners are looking globally. What do you see globally in media that's working? And what do you see that's in Africa that's either working or has potential?
So our thesis is precisely because so many people find media petrifying as an investment prospect. There are very real opportunities for what we hope is a halfway informed, smart outfit like ours. But our core thesis is that, I'm saying nothing new, but that in these growth markets that we look at, and we define growth markets as emerging markets with the huge capacity for scaling, the arrival of the smartphone changes kind of everything. So internet penetration, but also really the arrival of the smartphone. It changes commerce, it changes engagement, it changes politics, it changes civil society. But from an investment perspective, our view is that there are the opportunities in these markets to find and build generational media companies. And so we look Brazil, Mexico, Africa, in a regional way, the Middle East, India, and then Southeast Asia. You've described, in a sense, the kind of things that we look for in those media companies. We're looking for a very clear editorial voice, a voice which is profoundly authentic and which can express itself across multiple platforms, but with something real at the core. We're looking for spectacular and market-leading distribution, an approach to distribution which is cleverer than everybody else, because I think that's fundamental. And then we're looking for multiple revenue streams, because the great difference, and I think the reason that most VC avoids media, is what the ideal VC investment is a widget with the possibility for some network effect, which you can just keep on spinning out. Media, unfortunately, is not like that. Media, you start every day there's a French expression, which is you start every day naked in the wind. And you have to build your audience again. You have to find your content. You need to continue to sell advertising. It's not a widget. So you need profound resilience in your teams, even more than perhaps in your usual startups. And you need multiple different areas of revenue. And so we think of, I think 7, 8, 9 advertising, which of course we know is shrinking. Native, which is a growing area. Production, video, e-commerce, subscription, merchandise, syndication. With that, what we've seen is in these core markets that we focus on, we've seen extreme growth in the media companies we've invested in, and profitability much earlier or the prospects of profitability, because we really do invest very early, but the prospects of profitability much earlier perhaps than we'd imagined too.
Great. Tutu and Adamik, a question for both of you together. So as someone who runs a business media company, I always come to Africa and I'm searching out for business media, financial media, and it's a relatively underdeveloped market. I mean, if you look across the continent, there are certainly a few local things here and there, but it's explain to me the state of business media as you understand it, and where do you think it's going to go? What's holding it back? Could it become a great opportunity? Because in other markets, business media is one of the best segments of media because readers will pay, and the readers who are involved in business are very valuable to advertisers. So what are your thoughts on business and financial media?
Okay. Yes, you're right. Business media should be one of the most, one of the, excuse my English.
No.
One of the the best
demographics.
Not for the revenue. But in Africa, the business media is still beginning. As Financial Africa, we show two things. One, there is no model. Up to now, there is no successful model in Africa. We are all searching for model. And the model shall be mixed. With one way, we should have paywall subscription in a website and free access, because media should be a media with social services and free access for all the people. And in another side, the preoccupation of all entrepreneurs is to make revenue. The question of revenue is not solved still in Africa. But the market is growing, is what we've seen, is now, for example, with Financial Africa, there is a more and more subscription from companies, from investors, from legal cabinet, and I think the trend will be keep on growing. But in Africa, we have three challenges for business media. The one challenge is to keep producing news in the best standard. It's not just to produce, it's not like raw materials. You have to produce and then to process it, to make it in the world standards. And after that, we have to make the new accessible to worldwide. And then in this step, you have to invest. And all of the African media in the business sector, in the traditional or websites, are facing low capital. They have not a lot of revenue to invest and to play the world competition, to be like, for example, foreign policy journal, which I think this model should be the best model in Africa, as they earn 150 million in 9 months.
The Wall Street Journal, yeah.
I think maybe it will be the best model for us in Africa.
Tutu.
And I think,
where do you get your African business media information? I mean, you're studying companies, entrepreneurs. Where are you going for your daily pan-regional African business information? How are you making investment decisions without it?
I know we're sitting in the hallowed conference of Bloomberg, but to get cutting-edge information, you tend to have to go directly to source, because the media outlets tend to be behind the curve when it comes to the information that is required. And the level of detailed analysis and the level of quality reporting comes from very few places, and it is fragmented. So when we continuously look at these business models. The size of the business communities are very small because the size of the markets relative to GDP are very small. So if you're going to be building a business, I wouldn't necessarily go out. There are very, if there are 100 newspapers in Ghana, there may be 3 focused on business because the universe is very small. One of the other challenges I feel about investing in media businesses is that, and I'll make a generalization here, the younger you are, the less likely you are to pay for the content that you receive. I think if you were to bring the Wall Street Journal numbers up, you would find that their average reader is significantly older than the median age of 2021 there is here. So even the most successful media industries, take a look at Nollywood, they've had to significantly drive down the cost of making movies because your window from being able to raise content before it gets duplicated and replicated in the public domain for free is incredibly small. So if you don't make a movie for $20,000, you won't be able to recoup your cost in 2 weeks. It doesn't exist. Coupled with the fact that you now have these huge institutions who, excuse me to say, claim to act as if they are neutral providers of other people's information. But the reality is they are proprietary networks of curated information. Whether we like it or not, they are news services. And for some reasons, our regulators are 1,000 years behind the curve of ensuring that they are treated like news services and they're responsible for the content, because the impact of what they are doing has long-term effects which we're not going to see for a reasonable period of time. If you talk to an average millennial, they get most of their content from these news services. These news services are curated in a way that none of us understand. Nobody understands the biases that are associated with the algorithms, whether they have racial biases, sexist biases, and look what's coming out of that part of the world at the moment. I cannot believe that the very public behavior that we're seeing at the moment is not reflected in the algorithms. So are we creating a new world of misogynists because no one's actually looking at these things? So we struggle because I don't think even those who run media businesses understand the business models. And I think the scary proposition with our young kids is that very good high-quality content is very hard to find in the cacophony of information that's out there. And without some interventions, I do think we're going to wake up one morning to find out that we're never going to be able to develop the content that we require because the business models don't exist to make them sustainable.
That's a good transition to the Google and Facebook. Feel free to clap. Good transition to the platform question. And Adame, I don't know, in building Financial Afrique, Kanye, in building your Destiny brand, beyond some of the sort of more concerns or civil societal concerns that Tutu articulated, how big of a threat are Google, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp to your business, to building your businesses? LinkedIn.
Yeah, as I talked before, we are a measure should be in the mix way now, and you have include social media, because it's social media now. All the readers, when you see at the end of the day your figures, you will see that almost 40 to 50% of the visitors coming from social media.
Off platform.
Yeah. In this year, we launched YouTube video. Our journalists, we have 10 journalists across Africa, and some of them are an old school journalists. They say, no, we don't think that YouTube is important for us. As we are business media, we have to write articles. The article is what we say that is business, serious or no. Video are not serious. But we launched one video about the president of one African country, very popular, and the president of France. It was a clash between them. And since we launched this video, we have 100,000 views in less than 2 weeks. And it was one of the best scores we get. And all the journalists start telling that, no, now we have to include social media, we have to include Facebook, we have to include all the alternative ways to earn more readers. I think in the future, there will not be journalists just as website, but it's a multimedia channel mixed with all the newspaper, because in Africa especially, the newspaper is still very, very important for business because it's legal.
You know, I mean, just to comment about that, over the last 4 years, U.S. venture capitalists poured money into these new companies. BuzzFeed is one, Vox is another. That, you know, they poured hundreds of millions of dollars into these new companies that were designed to be built on the social platform ecosystems. And for years, for the last few years, they, you know, for the first 3 years, let's say starting 5 years ago, they saw significant revenue growth. The last 2 years, they're flat. And they can't monetize. They may have millions and millions and hundreds of millions of people on their Facebook live pages, their Facebook channels, their Twitter feeds, everything. Instagram, they cannot monetize it because the platforms aren't letting them. And now they're pulling back. Their valuations are plummeting, and they're having to sort of rethink their game. So it's an interesting sort of thing. Anyway, Kanye.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, I think what is affecting quite a lot of those platforms is that the content and information, or at least content, is not king as much as we've always thought. Increasingly, young people do want content for free. They're not willing to pay for it. But I think the likes of Instagram, the likes of Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp have a very clear and important service that they provide. And I think the way to survive in media is to think about what service can you provide that is beyond just informing people. BuzzFeed initially, when sort of time was a challenge, the fact that they were sort of summarizing things and listing and coming up with their lists and so on was useful, and it certainly saw some traction, but it's easy to copy. Everybody started doing it, and summarizing content and updating content regularly, using a lot of video, and optimizing headlines and so on. And those things are great, but very easy to copy. And I think what media companies need to come up with is to think a lot harder around services and products that are difficult to copy, that are useful, that are localized as well, that are not just global, but actually focus on the areas that they operate in and focus on the issues that are important in those areas. For example, in South Africa, mentorship is a big issue, and one where there's a shortage of information that mentors young students, young executives going into the workplace. And we've just launched a new service called Mentor Feed that is aimed at providing self-mentorship and online mentorship using video primarily, but also articles, aggregating articles across different sectors. And we've seen really good traction and really good support of that. I mean, we've hardly put anything into it and hardly put any marketing into it. But again, it's using content we already have and turning it into a service that's useful. And the more we increase that usefulness, the more we can then start getting subscribers and utilizing your Facebooks and your Googles as well, but using their platforms to deliver a service that we've provided. I think it speaks to what Strive was talking about as well, is that to not just concern ourselves with the dominance of these platforms, and yes, they are dominant, and yes, they need to be regulated, and yes, there's a lot of harm that they are doing, but we also need to think just as hard and put just as much energy into thinking about the gaps that they're not serving, because they are there. And creating...
I mean, it sounds like what you've been doing is building sort of some quasi-marketing services agency type functions, at least in the content content marketing space. In the U.S. and Europe, media companies, I mean, one of the biggest, brightest hopes is the disruption of advertising agencies by media brands and content brands, because effectively an advertising agency doesn't own an audience, doesn't have a brand for that audience, and doesn't know how to create content. And if advertising is all about reaching audiences with content, why wouldn't a media company be better at it?
Absolutely.
Is that happening in Africa?
It is. We're seeing a lot of companies come directly to us to create campaigns that not only involve our platforms and audiences, but campaigns they could potentially use on other platforms because of the importance of content, because of our knowledge of the consumer, and because of particularly the millennial audience, which is not just about selling a product, but it's about connectivity. It's about what's your story, and do I buy into your story, and what difference are you making? And that you can't always communicate with traditional advertising. You have to create compelling content around that, and that puts media companies in a very good space. And it's another area to look at in terms of innovation and surviving in this highly changing environment.
Turi and Tutu, you imagine the day when Naspers came upon a small tech company in Shenzhen, China, and made what was one of the great investment decisions, like Masayoshi-san and Alibaba. Is there a company in Africa somewhere operating that can have that type of sort of regionalized, localized, huge opportunity for dominance and scale? Where is that company?
Can I jump in early, because I think that's a better question for you to. But
I'm asking both of you, actually. Yeah.
But I just want to come back to some of the things that you were saying. So the first thing that I want to share with everybody is that this rush to free, to the point that you were making earlier, this kind of the hope of the paywall, there's substance behind that. And in fact, there's data now coming out of the US that millennials are the demographic most willing to pay for content, along with
millennials,
the over 60s or something. So at the top end, that top end bracket. And I think, again, it's very, very small levels because there's not a huge amount of money in that young part of the demographic. But these people were brought up with streaming in a way that our generation was brought up with
Uber.
We paid for it, and then we stopped paying for everything, and it was wonderful for 15 years, unless you were in that business. So there's a culture shift there. So I don't think that this is necessarily heading in the wrong direction. And just to talk to this platform question again, I love your term services, because I think it points to, it helps reframe what media really should be doing. And it's a direct-to-consumer value add, which I think you frame very nicely. I loved your 11 points, very specifically because you talk about media as brand. And one of the great problems with the platforms is that they encourage media companies to think of themselves with the wrong metric, and that metric was audience numbers.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, to your point, the BuzzFeeds and Vices of this world chased after multiple 100 million audience views, forgetting that it was at that point entirely commoditized and all the value went to the platforms. And so now what we're seeing in the media companies that we're looking at is kind of a rollback from those enormous numbers, because they're not delivering value, and a focus on a different metric, which is engagement. And so so engagement as a metric on social is I think where we think all the value is, because if you're truly building brand, which you measure through engagement, you can then spin that out into multiple other different revenue streams, and eventually we'll start being able to make genuine revenue on the Instagrams and Facebooks of this world.
So Tutu, great points. Tutu, where is the next African 10 cent?
So now, I guess I'd broaden it out more to technology rather than just to media. And I think that there are
10 cents e-commerce and everything.
A number of companies which are focused on providing services that people pay for at a much cheaper but a more profitable rate. And what are the sort of services that people pay for? The monetized payments in itself, are very expensive. The transfer of money between individuals is very expensive. The transfer of money through financial institutions is very expensive. There are a number of companies doing very exciting things in their ability to lend at a much cheaper rate because they have a better understanding of the way people's earnings capacity, especially in light of the lack of infrastructure, using mobile data, social media interactions to generate a profile. There are a number of companies doing that. Other things that people pay for are in the area of medicines. I think you'll find in the continent that a significant number of people self-medicate. You know, people tend not to go to the doctor, they tend to go to the pharmacist. There are opportunities there to get better efficacy out of the way you interact with your medical professions by using technology. I think that's a huge area where some companies are doing some very exciting things. You know, we have fake news, we have fake medicines. There are a number of companies doing phenomenal work in that area, and the reality is that people will continue to take more and more drugs, and on that basis be able to validate the efficacy and the authenticity of drugs is another huge area. And then finally, I think one of the areas where there are some companies doing interesting things, depending upon where you look at it, is in the area of education. And I think that the area of education hasn't changed that much over the last, 100 years. And there are a number of companies ranging from, those who want to provide educational services at the base level at a much cheaper cost than the state can provide, through to those who want to provide value-added services in education, extra lessons, past papers, etc., in ecosystems. And I think those are solutions that transcend countries, because a payment system that works in Nigeria, as long as you have the right back end, works in every other country. An educational value-added system that works in Ghana, works in South Africa and elsewhere, and there are a number of companies working very, very quickly to get into that space. And those are the sort of spaces at the moment that really do excite us. And I think the final piece I'll talk about, which I don't think many people are looking at, is we all talk about data and the lack of data. And there are now some small but growing companies who are becoming a lot more technologically savvy about the way they go about collecting data that other people will pay for. Rather than waiting for the statistics department of a country to come up with data which is a year old, technology can be used to collect data which is almost real-time about the change of prices of fixed goods over time, which a lot of people in this room would pay for. So I think there are significant opportunities, and there are a number of very young, very smart people who are building businesses which have scale and will be bought out over time. So that's the space that we're looking at. Those are the spaces we're looking at, and we're very excited about them.
And all very adjacent to media, all involving content broadly defined.
Yes.
In some ways. Adame, what do non-French speaking sort of parts of Africa need to know about the Francophone markets that is different, that to understand them better, to succeed there, other than the language?
Yeah, I think the Francophone market is a niche. You see, it's quite different because it's in a globally market, but it's not playing or going on the same rules. But the searching of model is the same in all Francophone and Anglophone countries. And you talk about monetization. The dangers of social media is that there is no monetization. There is not a lot of monetization for media. And what we are searching for is how to have a lot of monetization. That's why I say there is no model up to now. We all searching model. And I think the best answer is to mix all the press, like the print, and the new world of media, the mobile, website, computer, to get all the client base. And then you have, there is a condition, if to access to big data. If you have a big data, according to my point of view, the big data is fundamental for all the business model. If you don't have data, you cannot know where you have to go, where there is a strength of the market. And in Africa, our challenges as media is to get access to big data, and then to get access to fund for to implement a new standards of media. Because without the standard of media, your news cannot go outside to your little area. You cannot make successful economic model and political also model, because economic and political are very linked. If there is a big news, if all the news related are made by, if you search in Google, you will say just it's made by Le Monde in Francophone, by Le Monde, Le Figaro, and the African press will come after 4 or 5 pages. I think it's not a good model. Mm-hmm. So, in one word, we have to be good cooker to make to mix all this, the big data, the social media, the print, and also the fund to have a good model.
Great, great. Thank you. Just I want to just turn to questions from the audience, because we just have a few minutes left before we're going to head to lunch. So any questions for the panel from the audience? We talked a lot. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much to all of you. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have lunch now, which is right outside, and then we'll be coming back here at 2 o'clock or 2:15. Is it 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock, I believe. Anyway, we'll certainly be letting you know. But thank you very much, and enjoy lunch. Thank you.